Okay, sorry about that. It took so long trying to get the screen set up. Anyways, welcome to lesson 2 or the second video to the series training videos being provided by Tuscarawas County Board of Developmental Disabilities. My name is Benjamin Kolbrich. I'm the Behavior Support Specialist here at TuscBDD, Starlight School. This video is about developing a behavior intervention plan. Now, there is a previous video, lesson 1, that's about functional behavior assessment. If you haven't watched that video, I please and highly recommend that you do watch that video before this one, because these two videos do go hand in hand, as in you have to complete an FBA before you can develop a behavior intervention plan, otherwise known as a BIP or BIP. Okay. So before we get started, we're going to download and print off a blank copy of the ODE Behavior Intervention Plan form. Front page kind of looks like this. You see that? All right, we'll say OP-2 Behavior Intervention Plan optional form. Okay. This form that we're going to go over is the most commonly used form in schools. Now, I've mentioned before in the previous video that these lessons are going to be for anybody that works with children with special needs. However, the first two videos are primarily geared towards more teachers and educators, because these are the forms, assessment form and an intervention plan that is used in schools for children with behaviors that are impeding on their learning and social development. So we're going to go over the Ohio Department of Education Behavior Intervention Plan form, since it's the most commonly one used in the school districts, and hopefully answer any questions that you might have, or be able to get a better understanding of how the form should look when completed. So pencil and paper is optional, of course, if you'd like to take notes. And I always recommend having a comfy chair and some snacks and drinks. Makes these trainings go by a little bit better, a little bit easier. And with that, let's get started. So overview. So what is a behavior intervention plan? We're going to discuss the basic steps of developing a behavior intervention plan. We're going to discuss how to complete each section of the OD. So we're going to go over step by step on each section, what should be in there, what kind of information should be in there, what to look for to help have a nice full BIP, so that anybody who reads it has an understanding of what the goals are for this child and what they are working on. Questions, comments. Obviously, this is being a pre-recorded training video. I can't answer any questions or comments live, but at the end, I do provide my email so that you are able to reach out to me and send me any comments that you might have about the video, maybe something I can improve on, something maybe you'd like to see. There are going to be other training videos in this series, some about ABA interventions, and there's going to be one about how to collect data, which is very important to be able to track and monitor behaviors and progress. And then, of course, there's a quiz. The quiz will be along with the video. It'll be one of the forms that you can print out and complete, and then you can send it to me, scan it, email it to me, and then I can look it over. And that quiz is just to help you to see if you got an understanding of the material that's being covered today. Okay. So what is a behavior intervention plan? So a behavior intervention plan, otherwise known as BIP, you hear BIP a lot, or FBA. So the FBA is the functional behavior assessment that you do before the behavior intervention plan, and then you do the behavior intervention plan for the student. But it's a proactive plan, action plan, that is developed for a particular student that engages in behaviors that impede the student's learning or the learning of others. So this plan is to help the student actually just to be able to learn better in the school environment and to be able to interact with their peers in a positive manner, right? So it consists of positive behavioral interventions, supports, and strategies. It's developed after, like I said before, it's developed after the completion of your FBA, or functional behavior assessment. So most schools currently use the ODE BIP format, as I mentioned before, and that's through same goal. That's just the program that they use. So the basic steps of developing a BIP. First, you want to identify the target behaviors in observable and measurable terms that are impeding on the students or others learning. So I talked about this a little bit in the first video. So observable and measurable. So they have to be goals, or they have to be behaviors that you can see and that can be tracked through data and measured. I mean, they can't be behaviors that you think are happening, or you think that the person's thinking in their head, or feelings, because you cannot measure those. You can't measure how a person's thinking. You can't see it. You can't measure how a person's feeling unless they tell you what they're feeling, but then even then that's subjective. So it has to be observable and measurable behaviors. Okay, so you're going to conduct an FBA using both direct and indirect assessments, which I talked about in the first one, the lesson 1 video. And like I said, if you haven't watched it, please go back and watch that video. It's only about an hour long. It's not very long. So you use these assessment types to identify the function of the behavior, because that's very important. First, we need to know why the behavior is occurring and why the student is engaging in these behaviors. What are they using these behaviors to tell us, or to what need are they trying to get met? Okay. You're going to develop the BIP based on information gathered from the completed FBA. You're going to meet with parents in the IEP team. Now, IEP is just individual education plan. Team members to discuss and review the BIP. So a lot of times when you see a child that has, and not all the times, they may have an IEP, they might have a plan to help them with their school academics, but they might not have a behavior intervention plan. But if they have a behavior intervention plan, they are going to have an IEP. So they might not always have it, like I said, a BIP with the IEP, but if they have a BIP, they do have an IEP, so that they do go hand in hand. You're going to meet with the parents' IEP team members for approval. You're going to implement the BIP and begin utilizing the positive intervention plans, intervention support strategies written in the BIP. And then you're going to track behavior progress through continued data collection and periodically analyzing this data. So that's the super important part, which I'm going to discuss in another video about taking data in different various forms and how you could take data. But after the plan is approved and you have your goals and everything is set up, you're going to use these intervention plans to modify the behavior to either decrease negative behaviors that are impeding on learning and increase positive behaviors to help to increase the learning. And you're going to track that. And that data is going to show you if the interventions are useful, or if they're if they're having a positive effect on changing the behaviors, or if they're not even changing the behaviors. If they're not changing the behaviors shown through the data, then you have to go back and look at the interventions and perhaps make some changes, because those interventions aren't working. Just because an intervention might work for one student doesn't mean it's going to work for another. Most of the time, though, generally there's interventions that are going to work primarily for a lot of students, but every student is different, so you have to make sure that the BIP is tailored to that student. So your ODE BIP form, as I said here, is you can see a couple of the pages I put. There's 4 total pages. So you have the first 2, or page 1 and page 2, and then page 3 and page 4. It's going to be a little packet like this. Like I said, if you haven't downloaded it yet, please do so you can have it with you and follow along. Download it, print it off. You can write on it if you'd like to. It's your copy. It's just an example copy. So how to complete the ODE BIP form section 1. So we're going to talk about sources of information. Okay, so in this first section, you're going to list all information sources used when completing the FBA. So this can include who you spoke to, what indirect forms you used, and I talked about this in the FBA lesson 1. I use FAST forms to have it completed out to get a perceived function of behavior. You can also use, there's other assessment forms that you might be able to use. The MAS is another popular one. If you had an indirect interview form, we can talk about that. So any direct observation forms used. Anything that you use to gather information from the FBA. So you're actually just going to go to your FBA and you're going to pull it from that onto there, okay? In section 2, where it talks about strength-based profile. Now, this is all still on the first page. A lot of this information you're actually just going to get from your FBA. That's why it's important to complete the FBA first. So you're going to give a brief description of the student's strengths, likes, interests, and preferences, etc. A lot of the times that you can find this in their IEP. You can get this information from the teachers that work with the student, from the aides that work with the students, from parents. That's where you can get this information. Then you would get that during your indirect assessment, which is basically your interviews. You give a brief description of positive relationships and any positive social behaviors. So you want to talk about, if they're in sports, if they participate in like bands or clubs or anything like that, if how they interact with their peers in a positive manner, if they have any positive skills that they demonstrate daily in class. You're going to talk about all of that in there. And you want to list any current supports being provided. So if there's outside support, like say maybe they're getting OT already, so occupational therapy, maybe they're getting speech already, maybe they're getting physical therapy. You want to make sure that you include all that into the second section as well. Okay. Section 3 is your functional behavior assessment. So this is just a summary. You're going to list your target behaviors as we listed in from the FBA. So there's in the first section, there's the targeted behaviors with a definition in observable and measurable terms. And you can also provide your baseline data. That's how I like to do it. So when you're doing that, you're just pulling information actually from the first section and in the FBA and pulling it into this part here. So you're just putting a summary. So let me just show you real quick here. Your FBA form, okay, and this can also be printed out under lesson 1. So this form here, you'll see at the top it says OP-1 functional behavior assessment, and under the first section where it says behavior of concern, okay, that information there you're going to be pulling and putting into this section under summary. What the goal, what the behaviors are, how they're defined, and then you put in baseline data. You also want to include your hypothesis from the FBA, which in that one is from section 8 on the FBA. Your hypothesis was basically why you believe this behavior is occurring, what you believe the function of the behavior is based off your data. You're going to put that in there. And like I said, all this information is taken directly from the FBA. So it's basically almost like kind of a copy paste kind of thing. You're just taking that information from the FBA and pulling it into the BIP. All right, so section 4 is the BIP strategies and outcome worksheet. Okay, so now we're going to go over each section. I talked a bit about what setting event strategies are. Sorry that I see that there's a misspelling on there, but that's supposed to be setting event strategies. There we go, fixed it right there. Okay. So setting event strategies, and then you have your antecedent strategies, okay? So setting event strategies are strategies and interventions that are always in a place in the classroom. So they are like antecedent strategies because they are before behavior. Now remember when I talked about antecedent strategies in the first video, their antecedents are things that happen before behavior, consequences are what happen after a behavior, okay? Setting event strategies, though, are antecedent strategies that are always in place. They're not directly before the behavior. They've been there. So examples are going to be like your classroom schedule that might be posted up on a wall. That's the daily schedules there all the time for the whole classroom. And the teachers will have that, they might adjust it in the mornings before class comes in. If they might have a different special that day, that might get changed. But most of the time, that schedule is always there. It doesn't move. You have all material prepared and readily available for a day. So everything's already ready to go. All worksheets, tasks, things like that are ready to go before the student gets there. You review over the day's schedule every morning. So that's a routine that you do just every morning prior to any behaviors or before starting any tasks or anything. You have preferential seating, which is, just the child sits in an area maybe that they're preferred to them, or they have a particular seat, comfy chair maybe, or something that they like. So that might help them to focus a little bit better. And positive greetings each morning. That's another one. I love that one because you are setting the tone for the day, right? You are greeting them, smiling. How you doing? Nice to see you. Can't wait to get learning today. So it's just a great strategy to get them in a positive mood, because sometimes kids, they're tired. Maybe they didn't have a good breakfast. They don't want to get up so early in the morning. And, so when they come in and you're positive, it helps to make them feel a little bit better. Okay, so antecedent strategies. Now, these are strategies that you do directly before the occurrence of a behavior, so that you're preventing the behavior from happening. Now, and like I said, it seems a little bit confusing that setting event strategies are also antecedent strategies. Okay, but there are things that are in place even way before the student's even in the classroom. There are things that are always in place. So think of it that way. So there's something that's always in place, and they're not something that you're doing right before a known behavior could occur. Okay. Antecedent strategies is a strategy that you're trying to do prior to a behavior occurring. So it's something that you would do if okay, I'm going to give Johnny a task, and I know he's going to hit me. Okay. So I'm going to do this strategy right before I give him this task to hopefully stop the hitting behavior or prevent it from even happening. Okay. Hopefully that helps to explain it a little bit better. So there's strategies and interventions that are used before the occurrence of problem behaviors to decrease the behaviors from occurring. So some examples: non-contingent reinforcement. All that is when you're providing reinforcement, non-contingent on any behavior. So the child doesn't have to do anything specific to get reinforcement. It could be anything, right? You're teaching in class and you just look over and Johnny's sitting. Johnny, I love the way you're sitting today. Thank you for sitting so nicely. Or it could be he's working on his task, or he's just it could be anything. Maybe he walked from the door to his seat. Johnny, thank you so much for walking to your seat and sitting down. That was a good job walking, using nice walking feet. It's anything that positive that you want to bring to the student's attention. So non-contingent reinforcement. It doesn't have to be on a specific behavior. You're giving reinforcement whenever you can. High probability request sequence. I don't want to go too much into all of these, but basically all that is when you start with a high probability behavior. Okay. And so let's say that Johnny does not like math worksheets. Okay. We know this. He doesn't like them. And most of the time he's going to hit you. So we start off with simple tasks that we know he'll complete, that he has no problem completing. Johnny, can you please get out a pencil? Johnny gets out a pencil. Johnny, can you please get out your eraser? He gets out an eraser. Johnny, can you please fold your hands? He folds his hands. So you're giving him a bunch of little tasks and you're starting to build him up into that compliance, right? You're getting him ready to do a non-preferred task or a low probability behavior or low probability task. Okay. I'm sorry, low probability behavior. So you give him a lot of little tasks that the high probability he's going to complete them. And then you give him the math worksheet after he's done those little tasks. Hopefully that's a quick explanation. But if you have questions about it, you can look up high probability request sequence. And I do talk about it in another video that will be coming out. Visual schedules, we're all very familiar with those. It's just a schedule just to see what classes or what tasks the student has to do. And it could be a personal visual schedule. Maybe it's a first then board, a pre-mac principle. So you can have a first then. So Johnny has to complete his math worksheet and then he gets a break, or he has to complete his math worksheet and then it's time for recess. So first then, right? And then a visual timer is also a good one. You set the timer to let them know how long they have to work prior to giving them the task. Okay, I just want you to work for 3 minutes on this math worksheet. That's all you have to do. And sometimes a lot for the students, the conception of time is very hard for them. So when you set a 3-minute timer and they think, okay, well, that's not so bad. As soon as the timer goes down, I'm all done. Instead of being given the worksheet and say, okay, you have to work on this until completion. All right. Next one. So section 4, a strategies outcomes worksheet. All right, so we have strategies. Okay, so we're talking about strategies and interventions that are always in place in the classroom. Oh, I'm sorry. Seems like it was a double here, or did it not? Oh, I am sorry. I hit the wrong button. Sorry, technical error. Give me 1 second, please. All right. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I hit the wrong button. Anyways, so working on the next one, we're going to be talking about, now this is still the same first page. You're talking about behavior teaching strategies, okay? So alternate behaviors. So these are strategies and interventions to teach new appropriate behaviors that have the same function as the problem behavior. So to decrease the problem behavior and eventually replace it, right? When we're trying to decrease one behavior, a lot of times you need to give it a replacement behavior so that the student can get the same needs met, but using a positive behavior instead of that negative behavior that they were using before. So some examples: functional communication training. So if a student can't communicate what their wants and needs are, they might hit, they might throw things, they might, scream, bang on things, kick, to get their needs met. And that's the only way they know how. But if they know how to communicate, whether that is through speech, whether that's through a communication device, whether that's through sign language, PECs, whatever, then they can get that need met in a positive way instead of engaging in those behaviors, right? Shaping. So shaping is when we're teaching one specific behavior, modeling it, molding it, and working on to learn a behavior. Okay. Chaining, forward, backward, total task. I get into this into another video that will be coming out, but basically that's where you're taking a bunch of simple behaviors, you're putting them together to teach them into what's called a chain, right? So a bunch of simple behaviors. Prime examples of this would be like hand washing, brushing teeth. It's a bunch of simple behaviors that they do, a bunch of little simple steps that they have to do to complete one giant behavior, one, large task, which is brushing teeth or washing hands, right? That's a bunch of little things. Prompting. I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with prompting. There's very different types. There's actually called the prompt hierarchy. And depending on which form you look at, it goes a little bit different. But for the most part, least to most intrusive. Least intrusive would be your verbal or your gestural prompting, and the most intrusive would be hand over hand prompting, basically, where you're just guiding their hand to do what they need to do, right? Social narratives, which is basically like social stories, as everybody calls them, but they're just, you take a specific like social event or something that might be happening and use a story to explain it and what's going on. I know with the whole COVID thing that's been going on right now, social stories about COVID. Why do we have to wear masks? Why are people getting sick? Why don't we have school? So social stories can help children to understand why certain things are going on in their environment, or understand why maybe they shouldn't do something, why it's not okay to hit, or it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to hate. So, and you can take these social narratives and tailor them more to the student. That's what you want to do. You want to tailor them to that behavior, or tailor them to what's going on in that student's life, right? Direct instruction and applied verbal behavior. And applied verbal behavior is basically when it's a teaching tool that is, how do I say this without going too much into depth? It's how to teach a student how to communicate, basically verbally, through learning these 7 verbal operants. And I'm not going to go too much detail, but that's just an example of an alternate teaching strategy. Okay. If you have questions about applied verbal behavior and you would like to actually know more information about that, please feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, I'll provide my email, and I can give you some places to look more in that up. But basically, it comes from B.F. Skinner and applied verbal behavior on how to teach the 7 verbal operants. Okay. So reinforcement strategies, consequences. So these are strategies and interventions that are used after the behavior, right? So remember how I talked about consequences are after the behavior. So you're going to use these after the behavior has occurred to increase the occurrence of positive replacement behaviors while decreasing problem behaviors, right? So this is examples are your token economy system, which I'm sure many are familiar with. Yeah, it's where instead of the student, when they do something that they're supposed to, they get a token, check mark. It could be anything, a star, whatever. And they have to earn so many stars or so many check marks, and then they get a prize or they get the big prize or whatever they earn. Maybe it's extra time in sensory room, or maybe it's extra time on the computer. They get 10 minutes on their computer because some kids love watching their computer, certain shows. Differential reinforcement, that's basically where you're reinforcing one behavior while putting another behavior on extinction. You're decreasing at the same time. So extinction is when you are trying to decrease a behavior by removing what is reinforcing that behavior. That could be attention. Most of the time it's attention, escape, whatever is maintaining that behavior, you're removing it. You're removing that positive reinforcement so that the behavior decreases and basically extinguishes. Verbal praise, that's a really easy one, of course. Social reinforcement, and then contingency contract, which is a behavioral contract. I would use that one for your older kids, higher cognitive functioning, that understand, because it has to go into, it's an agreement basically where the student has to engage in so many behaviors or engage in certain behaviors to be able to earn something or to get something. But if they don't, then they don't get that, whatever is in the contract. But it's a contract agreement basically that they have to engage in the positive behaviors to be able to get something or to earn something. Okay, and like I said, if you have more questions or you want to know more about these different type of strategies, because I'm just going over them briefly, feel free to reach out to me. Okay, next one, section 5. So this is actually on the second page now, and you'll see it. I'll say goal statement there. Develop an action plan. This says goal statement right underneath. So you want to use 1 page per behavior goal, okay? You want to start off with the interventions and the skills. So this is where the behavior goal is written. And I talked about how goals should be written before, but we're going to go over it again in this section. So goal should be written in a format that states when the condition is present, 1, the student engages in a positive replacement behavior, 2, without the problem behavior, or thereby decreasing behaviors, and then what the limit is, okay, to hit that mastery criteria. So you should always write the goals that work to increase positive replacement behaviors and not just focus on decreasing problem behaviors. So basically all that's saying is that you want to just write these goals in a positive manner and not a negative manner. I don't want to write a goal where it says that Johnny will decrease hitting by 50% over the next 3 weeks, because that's just very negative, or it seems like you're just focusing on hitting. You're not talking about like a positive way of decreasing hitting. So if you want to decrease hitting, you want to write it in a way where it's like, what are you replacing it with? What positive behavior are we trying to increase? So the example here at the bottom is when presented with a non-preferred task, there's your condition, okay? John will remain in his seat without eloping behaviors. There's the positive behavior to increase while decreasing the problem behavior. See how we put that together? Within 2 prompts, there's your limit to be successful, and 3 out of 5 opportunities for 4 consecutive weeks, and that's your master criteria. So there are your 4 parts to your goal, okay? You need to make sure you have all 4 parts to that goal for it to be a good behavior goal. Okay, if I was talking about hitting and we say it's non-preferred task, and we're going to use John again. So we'll say when presented with a non-preferred task, my condition, John will keep hands to self. Okay, there's the positive behavior, and complete the task without hitting. Okay, There's my problem behavior while decreasing, or I'm sorry, there's my positive behavior while decreasing the problem behavior. Within 2 prompts, there's my limit. And let's just say in the same again, 3 out of 5 opportunities for 4 consecutive weeks. And there's my master criteria, okay, for him to be successful and reach that goal. Okay. So when I'm talking about hitting or any negative behavior, I want to look at what's my problem or positive behavior that I'm replacing it with. Okay. So for John in his seat, it might be to remain in his seat. And then the teacher then can use maybe a picture card as a prompt to stay in seat. And that's how she's going to work on John staying in his seat. If it's hitting and we were working on safe hands, maybe that's just the prompt right there. Maybe it's the teacher folds her hands and John sees that and he knows, oh, I need to fold my hands, keep safe hands and not hit. Okay. Or it might just be the verbal prompt, safe hands. And then he knows, okay, stop hitting, keep hands to self. That's the prompt. So whatever intervention you're using to increase the positive behavior while decreasing the negative behavior. But this is how your goal should be written. Remember, it needs to have 4 parts. So once again, your condition, your positive behavior to increase while decreasing the problem behavior. Your positive behavior to increase while decreasing the problem behavior. That's a mouthful. Then your limit to set to be successful, and then the mastery criteria. So 4 parts, okay? And you use that same formula for every behavior goal that you're writing. Now remember though, if you have multiple behavior goals, you need to have multiple sheets for your behavior intervention plan, okay? Now, with that being said, you should only be working on 2 or 3 behaviors at a time to modify, like I talked about in lesson 1, because if you try to change too much, then you're going to be unsuccessful because we are modifying major behaviors. And when we're trying to change too many behaviors at one time, you become very unsuccessful because it's just too much for the child. So keep that in mind. Try to stick to 2, no more than 3 behaviors at a time that you are working on. So how to complete the BIP form, section 5, developing an action plan goal statement. All right, so we're on the same page still, and we're going to talk about who implements. All right, so you want to list all who interact with the student and utilize strategies and interventions outlined in the BIP. So that can be anybody. That's going to be your teacher's aides, paraprofessionals, intervention specialists, anybody who works with that student, okay? So for how long, you want to set the length goal that will be addressed and worked on. So typically stated until mastery criteria is reached, right? So that's what I normally put down. So how long are you going to work on the goal? Until mastery criteria is reached, right? Because then once mastery criteria is reached, you got to change the goal. You got to change that mastery criteria. So if they hit that 3 out of 5 opportunities within 2 prompts, right, in the 4 consecutive weeks, so maybe now we need to go from, which is basically 60%, maybe we need to go from 60% success rate to 70 or 80%, that 3 out of 4 opportunities, which is 75%, I'm sorry, or 4 out of 5 opportunities, which is 80%. So you have to change the criteria. You keep stepping it up. Most of the time, though, student is never going to hit at 100% of the time, okay? Hitting's not going to always go away. It's not going to be gone forever, okay? It's not like they're ever going to do it. But it might get to the point where they hit that 80, 90% criteria, mastery criteria, and that's good. So if I have a student that's completing 80 to 90% of their tasks without behaviors, that's a win, right? Especially when you were going from maybe a baseline of completing only like 10 or 15% of their tasks without behaviors. And now you get them up to like, 70, 80, 90%. That's a huge win. That's a big improvement. Okay. Data used to measure progress. So you're going to talk about how will data be collected and behaviors be tracked. So examples of this, and which I will talk about in another video, is going to be data collection tool, using frequency, which is just the number of times it occurs, duration, which is just the length of the time the behavior occurs, latency, which is the time between when a student is given a directive and the time they start that task, that latency period, okay? And, those are your some collection methods, like I said, talk about in another video. So who's going to collect the data? You want to list anybody who's going to be collecting the data on the behaviors being tracked. That could be the teachers, that could be the paraprofessional, that could be intervention specialists, that could be whoever is tracking the behaviors and tracking the goals using the data sheets. That's who's going to be on there? So who's monitoring during the intervention? This is the person who will oversee the BIP, analyze the data, and provide any training support to other school staff. Okay, so that's typically your primary teacher or intervention specialist. That's going to be who's listed there. The review schedule is typically set for when the mastery criteria is set. So monthly, typically, right? Because I usually set mine for every 4 weeks, 30 days. Because I tell, and here's another thing that really keep in mind. Behaviors don't change overnight, okay? And they don't occur overnight, okay? Kids do not develop behaviors overnight, okay? It takes time. Behaviors are learned. So therefore, when we're trying to change behaviors and modify behaviors, we need to remember that it takes time to change these behaviors. Anytime I put an intervention in place, whether that is school, home, community, does not matter. I talk to the person in the caregiver, whether that's the parent, whoever that might be, whoever's under the child, has taken care of that child in that setting, teacher, parent, whoever. Then when you put an intervention in place, you've got to give it at least 3 to 4 weeks to see if that intervention is successful in modifying the behavior. If we go through and we keep changing behavior and changing the interventions like every couple of days or once a week, then we never know if the intervention is working and changing the behaviors. And then the behaviors may never change because we're always changing the intervention. It's always something different. So we have to be consistent. And like I've said before, consistency is key. Okay, so give it 3 to 4 weeks, taking data, being consistent, using those interventions to see if the behaviors change. Okay, so that's why I say monthly, 4 weeks. And it can be set for the end of the BIP, but it's encouraged to be done on a regular basis in case the BIP goals need to be adjusted due to reaching mastery criteria or not being prevalent anymore, right? So those behaviors could change in a monthly basis. They could, every 4 weeks, you might have to change those goals. Might not happen, right? It might be like, okay, well, I'm seeing some change, but we haven't reached mastery criteria yet. So I'm going to stick with the same goals or stick with the same interventions, but we need to stay with the same goal because the child hasn't reached mastery criteria. So it might take longer than 4 weeks, but you're seeing that positive change is just taking a little bit longer. Or you might get the 3 or 4 weeks, there's been no change in behaviors, okay, from baseline, no positive change, maybe it got even worse. So you need to look at, okay, maybe these interventions aren't working. I need to change the interventions. So then you need to, revamp the BIP and change the type of interventions that are being used. So it's very important that you're always collecting data, looking at that data being analyzed to see what is going on with the behaviors. If you're having progression, regression, no change at all. Okay. All right. So crisis intervention plan. This is on the third page, page 3. Okay. All right. So an action crisis or action plan or the crisis plan. Okay. Now, some students have behaviors that are that can be harmful to the student or harmful to others. And they need a crisis plan to know what to do when these behaviors happen. Okay, so staff knows what to do and how to handle these behaviors in the best response for that student. Some students I've worked with, they don't need a crisis plan because the behaviors that they have are not unsafe to the student or unsafe to others. They're not harmful in any way. If the student is just an eloper and they like to get out of their seat, but they stay within the classroom, it's not really considered an unsafe behavior and a crisis plan might not be needed. But if the student is climbing furniture and this is an unsafe behavior to the student, they might need a crisis plan because if they are climbing bookshelves all the time, that's very unsafe to them because then they could fall. Or if they're leaving the school building, if they're looking out of the school building or out of the classroom, that's unsafe, right? So then you would have to have a crisis intervention plan so that anybody who works with that student or any other staff can read their crisis plan and know what to do when the student engages in those behaviors, okay? So crisis intervention plan, you're going to develop for the students that engage in severe problem behaviors that may cause harm to student or others. So examples like I talked about eloping, but like eloping out of the school building or out of the classroom, right? Big time eloping. not just getting up out of the seat and walking around. Self-injurious behaviors, or SIBs, that's when the student is hurting themselves, the child's hurting themselves. Physical aggression, right? So hurting others. Property destruction, so breaking things, destroying things, throwing stuff. So you want to list steps for staff to take to ensure the safety of the student or other students and for the staff themselves, right? Everybody needs to be safe during a crisis. Well, that's the top priority. We want to make sure everybody's safe. It should be based on the behavior escalation curve. So if you have a question about what that is, that's basically like everybody starts off, no behaviors, and then they start to escalate, then they hit peak, and then they recover. So it's an up and down thing, right? So they start to escalate up, 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 and then they're hitting the peak behaviors at top, where they're engaging in all that problem behaviors. They're in full-blown crisis, and then the crisis starts to go away. The child starts to get calm again, and that's into the recovery phase where they're able to get back on task and get back to normal activities. That's basically what the curve is. There's actually 7 areas on that curve, but primarily just know that the 3 areas cover, right? Escalation, peak, recovery. So just to keep it simple. So use of table format may be beneficial and easier to use as a reference guide. Now, when I talk about that, is I developed a table before, when I used to work over in Pennsylvania doing in-home therapy. And there was this table that we broke it down into those specific areas, escalation, peak, and recovery, and what those behaviors look like in each stage of a crisis. And then under that was how to intervene with that child during that stage of the crisis. So it's a very simple way to look at, okay, the child's engaging in these behaviors, here's what I need to do. Or they're engaging in these behaviors under maybe peak, here's what I need to do. And so it's a quick reference guide, okay? If you have questions or you'd like to see that table, actually, please let me know and I can provide it for you. And so that you can see that. But anybody who's worked with me and knows that I like to use that table especially for teachers, so they don't have to go back and look through the crisis plan. Okay, you can just take all that information, you put it into this table, and then it's a quick reference guide that they can have on their desk and look to see and become very familiar with the child's crisis plan. Okay, so measuring progress, you want a continuous progress monitoring method. So this is going to be how staff tracks behaviors in crisis. What form of data collection will be used? So is this a fidelity checklist? So basically, a fidelity checklist is where after the crisis has occurred and everybody's safe and the child's back to normal, going through, did we go through all the steps like we were supposed to? Did we follow the crisis plan? Making sure everybody was safe. Was there any injuries, anything like that? So the fidelity checklist is make sure that you did everything that you were supposed to do in the correct order, okay? It might be an after crisis intervention form, restraint seclusion form if the child had to be restrained. Unfortunately, then that has to be filled out. Every school is a little bit different in some of these forms. But just I would look at your school policy to see what forms you would have to complete after a crisis has occurred. You want to also know the person that is responsible for completing these forms, the criterion for success. So what are we looking at as far as what success is that child need to be at so that they're no longer in crisis, right? So what are they, what are we trying to get that crisis down to? Is that, only eloping maybe once a week, once every couple of weeks? What's the criteria for success so they are no longer considered to be in crisis or to need a crisis plan, right? And then you want to have the following up meeting dates of when you're going to meet to talk about the progress of, crisis or the progress of those behaviors, whether it's eloping, self-injurious behaviors, physical aggression, property destruction, whatever that might be, but talking about the progress of where that student is at currently, how many times they might have eloped from the building over the past month. So if it's monthly that you're meeting, you could talk about, in the past month, Johnny eloped 5 times, but the month before he eloped 8 times. So we are seeing a decrease in crisis behaviors, which is good, right? That's what we want. So the newest IEP wording that supports and resources and training required for staff to implement the crisis plan. you want to communicating the behavior intervention plan. So all the people that need to be informed of the plan and how they will be contacted, who will contact everyone, date and frequency. So that's basically where you're going to be putting, everybody in there that needs to be contacted on their crisis plan, who's going to be responsible for doing so, and then how they're contacted, phone, email, whatever, and then the date that they were contacted, right? And then you want to get the signature of all the team members on there. So everybody, that's going to be your parents, that's going to be your teachers, the student, if they're old enough, their case manager, behavior support specialists, if I'm brought in, for outreach, I would be on there. Aid, OT, and anybody that's on basically your IEP team is going to be on there. Okay. All right, so that's it. As short, sweet. Just going over the sessions. Like I said, if you hadn't watched the first training video, please watch it. Lesson 1, FBA, very important. It's the first step before you can complete your behavior intervention plan. I typically love giving these trainings out in person because then I feel like I can talk to you and we can have a discussion if there's any questions or any comments. And I encourage all of that. Unfortunately, with these pre-recorded videos, that can't happen. So here's my email at bkolbrich, that's BKOLBRICH at TuscBDD.org. Please email me. I will respond with any questions, and I encourage all comments, of course. References, and then the quiz. I do encourage that you do complete the quiz. Like I said, there's no CEs or anything like this, but completing the quiz, it just helps to cement that more into your memory, and it helps you. That's all it's for, is to help you to feel more comfortable with completing these BIPs and to feel like you are completing a BIP that is going to be very successful for the student, because that's what we want. In the end, we want our students to be successful. We want our children to be successful in their learning environment. We want them to be in their home schools. We want them not to eventually maybe not even need a BIP. That'd be great, but if we make sure that we have a BIP that is complete within all the information that is needed, then that's going to set our child up for being the most successful. Okay. So 8 questions, real simple. If you print it off, complete it, scan it, and then send it to email it to me, and I'll just make sure it's correct. And I will give back to you your response or your grading on it. Like I said, there's no CEs, but it just helps you in the end and in the long run. So I want to thank you so much for attending this training on behavior intervention plan. There will be more trainings to come, 3 other trainings actually that I have set up that I'm going to be recording and providing to you. If you have any other trainings that you would like to see actually, or any topics that you would like for me to cover, to discuss, that you might actually want more information on, send me an email, let me know, and I can develop a training and definitely provide it to you. So once again, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.